Hello, we are going to today, instead of reading a Black Beauty chapter, we are going to read another Roman myth to go along with our ancient Roman unit. We are reading out of the book Classic Myths to Read Aloud. And we're going to be on page 90 if you have this book. The title of this particular story is Cupid and Psyche. What do you guys know about Cupid? Have you ever heard of Cupid before? I think most of us have heard of Cupid. When we think about Cupid, what do we think of? Yeah, we think of that cute little cherub guy that runs around with a little bow and arrow at Valentine's Day, shooting people and making them fall in love. That's what we think about when we think about Cupid. Well, let's read along in our story and find out about Cupid and Psyche. Psyche was a young girl who had a lot of sisters, and her sisters were jealous of her. But the thing about Psyche that we need to know is that she was really, really curious. If you remember the story last year, Pandora's Box, when you read it in your Greek mythology, if you remember that story, think of Psyche as similar to Pandora. She's that curious. Remember what happened with Pandora? She opened up a box and she loosened all of the evil on humans because she was way too curious. All right, well, let's read about Psyche and see how she's similar. There was a time long ago that Cupid himself lost his immortal heart to an earthly maiden. And this is how it came to pass. There was a certain king who had 3 lovely daughters. The older 2 married princes of wealth and fame, but the youngest, who was named Psyche, was so radiantly beautiful, so strikingly attractive, that it seemed no man could be worthy of her. People used to gather in the streets just to see her pass by. They sang hymns of her praise, and some strangers even mistook her for Venus, the goddess of beauty itself. Now, this praise for the beauty of a mortal maiden in time reached the ears of Venus, high on Mount Olympus, and it angered the goddess so much that she vowed to punish her earthly rival. One day she called her son, whose name was Cupid, and told him to sharpen his arrows for a very special mission. Cupid, you see, was a more dangerous archer than even mighty Apollo. For although Apollo's arrows could drain one's life blood in an instant, a wound from Cupid's arrows would cause one to fall deeply in love, and that could mean a lifetime of joy. But it could also mean a lifetime of sorrow and grief if that love was not returned or shared. Avenge your mother, Venus commanded. Wound this mortal maid, Psyche, and make her fall in love with some poor and unmannered man who will treat her cruelly and be a torment to her all of her days. Wow, it sounds like Venus is really, really jealous of Psyche. She wants nothing but bad things to happen to her. Cupid gathered and readied his weapons, and then, making himself invisible, flew down to earth and found Psyche deep asleep in her bedchamber. Cupid carefully touched her heart with the tip of his golden arrow of love, which caused Psyche to awaken suddenly with a start. She opened her beautiful eyes and looked right at Cupid, who forgot momentarily that he was invisible and was so taken by the incomparable beauty of this mortal maid that he accidentally wounded himself with the same arrow. Ignoring the hurt that he had inflicted upon himself, he quickly prepared a healing potion that would undo the effect of his arrows, and he poured his soothing vapor over her golden locks. Back to her dream, the princess went, unaffected by any thoughts of love. Cupid, now strangely not so light of heart, returned to the heavens, but he did not say a word of the events that had actually taken place that night. Venus waited several days and watched Psyche's every move from high above. But much to her dismay, she saw no sign whatsoever of Psyche's love for any mortal, rich or poor, and so she decided to send down her own spell upon this unsuspecting princess. From that time on, lovely as Psyche was, Not a suitor came to ask for her hand. Not a man in the kingdom, high born or low, tried to woo her, or to win her smile, or attract the slightest response from her. This sudden lack of interest in obtaining Psyche's favor made her parents quite concerned, for they so dearly wanted Psyche to marry a noble prince and to live a happy life. Now they wondered if she would ever marry at all. Thinking that her lonely situation might be the result of some offense that she had unwittingly given to the gods, some affront that had angered them into changing her fate, they took their daughter to the oracle of Apollo, and they asked the oracle to give them advice and counsel. After some time, a voice from inside the temple spoke to them. The Princess Psyche shall never wed a mortal man. She must be given to him who waits for her at the top of yonder mountain, one against whom both gods and men are powerless. Hearing this, her four poor parents were distraught, and they gave themselves up to grief as they pictured their fate that was in store for their beloved princess. Surely it must be a hideous monster awaiting her on the mountain, and she must now be delivered unto him. Only Psyche herself remained undismayed, saying, "We had angered Venus in some way, and now I must atone for that sin so that you and our kingdom will be allowed to prosper once more. It is the will of our gods, and so we must obey." At last her parents consented, and preparations were made for Psyche to be delivered to and wed to whoever or whatever awaited her on the mountain. The royal maid took her place in the procession that wound its way up the steep slope, and when they reached the very top, they left her there alone. Full of courage, but in secret fear, she watched her people proceed down the mountain path, weeping for her fate, too sad to look back. Only when they were out of sight, then did she weep, and her tears ran like raindrops down her cheeks. But now a sudden breeze drew her and dried her tears and caressed her hair, seeming to murmur comfort to her. It was Zephyr, the gentle west wind, who had come to befriend her. He lifted her up in his arms, and he carried her up and over the crest of a fateful mountain into the valley below. And there he left her resting on a bank of lush grass, and there she fell asleep. When she awoke, it was near sunset. She looked about her for some sign of the monster's approach, but she heard and saw nothing unusual. Nothing, that is, until she peered through a clump of nearby bushes and saw, much to her amazement, the most magnificent castle her eyes had ever beheld. Its golden pillars supported a high arching roof. Its walls of purest silver and walkways inlaid with precious gems reflected the light of the setting sun. There was no lock or chain on the great doorway, and there was no guard to stop her from entering, which she did. As she gazed in awe at the splashing fountains and her marbled hallways, a sweet and comforting voice spoke to her, saying, "Do not fear, gentle princess, for all that you see is yours. Many servants await your every wish. Lie down now and rest. Your bath is being prepared, and a feast will follow." And indeed, for the next several days, Psyche's smallest requests were immediately answered. She was waited upon by unseen spirits and sung to by invisible choirs, and every night she heard the soothing voice of the man to whom she had been given, although she had never beheld his form. Only after sunset would he come to her, and his voice, the beautiful voice of a god, would inspire her to trust her strange destiny and to believe in her absolute love for her. Often she begged him to stay with her through the day so that she might see his face, but this he would not grant. "Never doubt me, dearest Psyche," he would say. "Perhaps you would fear me if you saw my form, and your love is all that I ask. There is a reason I must remain hidden for now. Trust me and believe." Surely, thought Psyche, the spirit whom the oracle had called her husband was no monster. But what was he? And why must he remain unseen? Those questions haunted the princess even as she partook of all of the pleasures of her new surroundings. And she thought of her dear parents, who were no doubt mourning her loss at the hands of some cruel beast. And she missed the company of her two sisters, who were suffering the life of mere mortals while she lived as a goddess. One night she told her husband of these regrets, and begged that her sisters at least might come to visit her. He sighed, but he did not refuse. "Zephyr shall bring them here," said he. And on the following morning, swift as a bird, West Wind came over the crest of the high mountain and down into the enchanted valley, bearing her two sisters. They greeted Psyche with joy and amazement, hardly knowing how they had come to be where they were. But when she led them through the palace and showed them all the treasures that were hers, envy and bitterness arose in the hearts of her sisters. They asked 1,000 questions, hoping to find some flaw in her good fortune. And when Psyche finally had to confess that she had never seen her husband, they laughed at her steadfast face, saying, "Have you forgotten what the oracle decreed? That you must be giving to a creature, pardon me, that overcomes both gods and men. Are you so deceived by this show of kindness that you are blind to his evil intent? Be warned, dear sister, your husband is some sort of dragon who feeds you well for the present, so that he may feast upon you some day soon. Trust not his words, but see for yourself. Some night when the monster is asleep, light a lamp and take with you a sharp dagger. Then you can put him to death, and all of his riches will be yours and ours." After the sisters had gone, Psyche brooded over what they had said, not seeing their evil intent. Little by little, suspicion ate at her like a moth, until one night, in shame and fear, she hid a lamp and a dagger in her bedchamber. Toward midnight, when her husband was fast asleep, up she rose, hardly daring to breathe, and coming softly to his side, she uncovered the lamp in order to see the monster's face. But there before her, in the light of the lamp, the youngest of the gods lay sleeping. It was Cupid himself, the most beautiful and most irresistible of all of the immortals. His hair shone golden as the sun. His face was as radiant as springtime, and from his shoulders sprang two wings, showing all of the colors of the rainbow. Poor Psyche was overcome with fear and love and guilt. Her hands trembled as she turned to quench her lamp. But as she did so, some of the burning oil fell upon the shoulder of the fair Cupid, awakening him with a start. He opened his eyes to see his bride and the dark suspicion in her heart. "Oh, doubting Psyche," he said, "is this how you repay my love? After having disobeyed my mother's command and taken you for my wife, I had so hoped that your fate would be as constant as my love. But I see that you find your sister's advice preferable to mine, and so I must leave you now forever. Love can never dwell where there is suspicion." And so saying, he seized his bow and his quiver, unfurled his wings, and flew away out the open window. Psyche tried to follow him and explain to him and apologize for the doubts that she had, but she could not fly, and so tumbled to the ground in a daze. When her senses returned, she stared about her, and saw that she was alone. The palace and the gardens had vanished, and the valley was beautiful no longer. From that moment, she began to wander day and night through many lands, seeking her beloved Cupid and a chance to make amends for her faithlessness. Meanwhile, Cupid lay in his mother's chamber, wounded not only by the burning oil, but more seriously by his own arrow of love, which had pierced his heart when he first beheld the loveliness of Psyche. Venus grew exceedingly angry with her son for having fallen in love with this unworthy mortal maid, but she was still more angry with the maid herself for causing Cupid to be so sick at heart. And Venus would have destroyed poor Psyche on the spot had not the great Juno stopped her and declared her judgment that the pair had committed no evil, that they had merely fallen in love and were now suffering as lovers often do. Hearing this, Venus returned to care for her son, but she harbored still a deep resentment for the Princess Psyche. I wonder what she's going to do to her. After wandering long and far without success, Psyche decided to seek the forgiveness of Venus and to submit to whatever punishment or penance that Venus might demand. She presented herself at the goddess's temple and asked to be allowed to be served in any way that she could. As Psyche knelt sobbing at the entrance, the beautiful Venus herself appeared, but wearing a most angry look. Have you come to see your husband, whom you so cruelly wounded, and whose love you so heartlessly cast aside?" the goddess asked. "Well, we shall see whether through your cleverness and hard work you can earn the right to take your apology to him." So saying, she led Psyche to a large storehouse filled with great quantities of wheat, barley, beans, and many other seeds and grains as well, all mingled together in one immense heap. "Separate these, grain by grain and seed by seed," Venus commanded, "so that each kind is a pile of its own. And see to it that you are finished by nightfall." Then Venus departed, and Psyche sank to her knees in tears, knowing that such a task would be impossible even for the mighty Hercules. What Psyche didn't know, however, was that Cupid was watching over her, still as ardently in love with her as ever. And from the corner of her eye she began to see a moving black thread that seemed to emerge and crawl from a crevice in the storehouse wall. Bending nearer to investigate, she saw that it was a great army of ants in columns that had come to her aid. The industrious little creatures worked so rapidly and so diligently that even before the last light streaked the evening sky, all of the grains and seeds were separated, and the impossible task was completed. When Venus saw that the storehouse had been completely transformed, just as she had requested, she knew that Psyche must have had some divine help, and she became even more determined to make the mortal princess suffer for the way she had treated Cupid. On the next morning, she ordered Psyche to gather some wool from each of the ferocious rams with golden fleece that gazed in a nearby grove. Not just some of the golden wool, mind you, but some from each ram. Else Psyche must return to her family at once and forever. Well, poor Psyche couldn't even cross the mighty river that bordered the grove, much less did she know how she would overcome the sharp horns and the gnashing teeth that awaited her on the other side. And once again she wept in despair. But Cupid persuaded the river god to help her in her quest, and soon she was carried across the treacherous waters and instructed to pick the golden wool not from the rams themselves, but from the bushes and the briars that touched the coats of all of the rams as they passed by. Once again, Venus became enraged when Psyche returned, her arms full of shining fleece. "I know very well that this is not by your own doing that you have succeeded in these tasks," the goddess fumed. "But whoever is aiding you against me will be of no help to you this time. Here, take this box and make your way into the underworld. There you will find Proserpine and say to her, 'My mistress Venus asks that you send a little of your beauty to her, for she has lost some of her own in caring for her injured son.' Now, Psyche, let me see if your wits are a match for this challenge." Psyche was certain now that her destruction was near, for she knew well that mortals did not venture into Hades and return to earth alive. And so it was in utter despair that she climbed a high cliff and prepared to kill herself by jumping from its edge. But a soothing voice whispered in her ear, "I know your grief, dear Psyche, but listen to me, and you will learn a safe way to make your journey and return." And the gentle voice went on to tell her how one might avoid all of the dangers of Hades and come out unscathed. "Just be sure," added the voice, "that when Proserpine has returned to the box, you do not open it, however much you may long to do so." Psyche listened well and followed every step the voice had told her, and before long she had made her way safely into Hades and into the palace of the king and the queen. She made her errand known to Proserpine, who complied with her request, and soon Psyche found herself in the upper world again, wearied but hopeful. "But I am so worn with toil," she lamented, "that my appearance will no longer be pleasing to my husband. I have come so close to seeing him again, and now he will think me unattractive. Surely Venus cannot need all of the beauty I have brought back in this box, and since it is only to please my beloved husband, it might be right for me to take just a little." And so saying, she carefully opened the box. Poor Psyche should have known that the spells and the potions of Hades are not for mortal maidens. No sooner had she inhaled the strange aroma that was emitted than she fell down in the middle of the road, without sense or motion, quite overcome with the deepest sleep. Now it happened that Cupid had recovered from his wound, and he could no longer endure the absence of his beloved Psyche. He slipped unnoticed from his chambers, and he flew to the spot where she lay. He gathered up the potions and the spells that had escaped and sealed them again in the box. Dearest Psyche, he said, your curiosity has once again led you to ruin, but the power of my love will save you. And he knelt beside her and kissed her cheek. As if from a dream, Psyche woke and found herself beautiful once again. Take the box to my mother as she commanded you, Cupid said, and I will take care of the rest. He spread his rainbow wings once again, and Psyche watched him rise until he was far out of sight. He continued on and up until he reached the heights of Mount Olympus, where all of the gods sat feasting, and he begged them to calm his mother's anger and hatred for Psyche. They heard his story, and their hearts were touched. The mighty Jupiter himself lent a favoring ear, and shortly thereafter called Venus to him and persuaded her to accept Psyche as one of her own. Mercury was dispatched to bring the mortal maid up to Olympus, where she was offered ambrosia and nectar on which to feast. Take these, Jupiter said, and become immortal. Nor shall Cupid ever be apart from you again. Psyche consumed all that she was given, and thereby became a goddess. Cupid took her by the hand, and they remained together forever. Here's a few things we just want to talk about after reading this story. Psyche is the Greek word for soul. From the base word, that root, we have the derivative psychology, which is a study of the mind. Psychiatrist, which is a doctor or a healer of disorders of the mind. In this myth, we see that Psyche's parents are consulting an oracle. Remember an oracle from last year in your Greek studies? It's a means of learning what the future held for their daughter. The word oracle comes from the Latin word that means to speak, the same root word that gives us oral and orator. The priestess at the oracle would often go into a swoon or a trance, thereby allowing a god to speak through her and to reveal the future. All right, let's go ahead and answer some questions about what we just read. Why do you think that Venus wants to punish Psyche? Exactly. She wants to punish Psyche because Psyche hurt her son, Cupid. But before that, originally she wanted to punish Psyche because she was jealous of her beauty. What happens to Cupid when he flies to Earth? Exactly. He sees Psyche and he falls in love with her. He falls in love with her. Whom does Psyche end up marrying? Yeah, Cupid. He marries Cupid. Whom does she think, especially after speaking to her sisters, that she married? Why do you think that is? Yeah, hold on just one second. Yes, she thinks that she has married a dragon because her jealous sisters come there and they put all kinds of suspicions in her mind. Why does Cupid tell Psyche that he can't be married to her anymore when she comes to him? Yeah, because he believed she trusted more in the suspicions of her sisters than she did than his faithfulness. Exactly. Why does Psyche finally ask Venus for help? Yeah, because she cannot bear to be without Cupid. She really, really loves him. What two tasks does Psyche ask Venus to do? The first one, yes, is to sort all of those different grains into piles by kind. And there's no way that she would have been able to do that. Cupid helped her, though, right? Yes, exactly. And what's the other task? Sure, she has to get the wool, from the golden fleece from each of the rams. And the rams are mean and they have bad tempers. But she's helped again, where she's told that she just needs to pull the fleece from the bushes where they have rubbed up against. And that completes the task that Venus wants her to do. And what's the last task? Exactly. She needs to go down into Hades, talk to Proserpine and get some of her beauty into a box and take it back to Venus. What happens when Psyche looks inside the box? Yep, she's boop, knocked over into a deep sleep, just like Sleeping Beauty when she bit, or Cinderella. No, Sleeping Beauty when she bit into the poison apple. Exactly. Does this myth end happily or unhappily? I agree. I think it ends happily. I believe that by Psyche being taken up into the onto Mount Olympus to live with Cupid, she's turned into a goddess, and there she lives forever with Cupid. So I think that's a happy ending. Why do you think that she was allowed to do that? I think so too. I think that the gods and the goddesses liked true love to prevail. And so that's what happened. You guys have a great weekend. I'll see you on Monday. Because what? Tomorrow is fall break. Starts this afternoon, goes through tomorrow. We'll see you on Monday, the 26th, the 19th. Have a great weekend. Bye bye.